Hi there, everybody, and welcome to our regular Facebook Live broadcast. My name is Erica. I'm an education coordinator here at the Alzheimer's Society of Simcoe County, and today is Monday, June the 14th. So maybe while we just take a moment here to let people connect into our broadcast today, I just want to welcome you all and mention our topic. So today I'll be talking about a topic called ambiguous loss and grief. So I'll kind of explain what that means. It's a kind of grief that certainly people who we work with, a lot of care partners, people living with dementia, experience this kind of grief. So it's a bit of a weighty topic today, but an important one. So that's what we're going to be focusing on. Our next Facebook Live broadcast, which will be June the 28th, I will be focusing on some self-care strategies. So, I mean, this is a difficult journey for many of you, and focusing on self-care is so very important. So I'd like to leave you with that positive message next Monday before we go for our summer break. And then we'll be taking a break for July and August from the Facebook Lives, and we'll see you again in the fall. So today, talking about ambiguous loss and grief, and I see some people are watching, so welcome. Please feel free to send your comments or questions. Along the way, it takes a little bit of time for it to reach me on my end, but I will keep an eye out for any comments that come up on my screen. So when we think about grief, I'll just start with that. Grief is a normal human response to any significant life change that we have. Whether it's a change in life circumstance, a significant job loss, maybe diagnosed with an illness. There can be grief in many different ways. So recognizing that this is just a normal part of life, we certainly, how we express grief or how we work through grief is a unique process. There's no right or wrong way to do that. So when you're thinking about people living with dementia, certainly when they receive a diagnosis, that's a huge, significant change in their life. So there's a grieving process to getting that diagnosis. And working with many people living with dementia, I've heard time and again a lot of the losses, significant losses that they experience. For example, loss of independence. Near the beginning of the diagnosis, that loss of being able to drive, being told that you're no longer able to drive is a huge loss. Loss of relationship, loss of ability, not being able to do the things that I used to be able to do. So these are huge losses, and certainly there's a grieving process that goes with that. For care partners, so family members or friends who are supporting somebody living with dementia, the kinds of losses that they express, again, loss of independence. So if their family members no longer able to get in that car and drive on their own, then they're usually the ones that are driving them. Or as the disease progresses and maybe it's not safe for the person living with dementia to be home alone, then for the care partner, and quite often this is the spouse, ends up also being home because they can't leave their family member alone. So feeling that loss of independence. And also, just like with the person living with dementia, that loss of relationship. So there's a lot of losses along the way. And there's the grieving process that goes along with those losses. So when you think about that term ambiguous loss and grief, this is kind of a special kind of grief. And when you think of that term, it was first coined by, her name is Dr. Pauline Boss, and she's done a lot of work over 40 years on this concept. She was a professor at the University of Minnesota. I think she's retired now, but she has a great website on this concept, and it's called ambiguousloss.com. So you can certainly go and check it out there, and I'll make sure to put that in the comments under this video when we're done. But what she recognized in the early 70s, so she was working with families who, there were soldiers that were going missing in the Vietnam War, and so the families afterwards were dealing with a certain kind of loss that they were really struggling to place. And it was that loss of, because there was no physical presence of a body afterwards, because the person had gone missing in action, that they didn't have the same kind of closure that you would normally feel when somebody close to you dies. So when you think about that very significant loss that we often think about with the grieving process of when somebody that we care about dies, and how we work through that. Our society, our communities, we have certain rituals, certain things that help us, that help the people who are left behind work through this loss and grief, whether it be a funeral or a celebration of life or a wake or whatever is appropriate in that culture. People bring over casseroles and they sing condolences, and all of this is meant to help the people who are left behind work through that loss and help them through the grieving process. But what happens when maybe the person, like in the case of soldiers who go missing in action, they're having all of this, but there's not an actual body to say goodbye to. And there's always a feeling of, well, what if? What if this soldier isn't actually dead? What if we're saying goodbye and they're really, in a prisoner of war camp instead? And so there was that ambiguousness to this. And as Dr. Boss continued doing her work, she realized that when we have somebody, for example, somebody living with dementia, there is a similar feeling, a similar kind of grieving process that goes with this. And in this case, it's not that the person is physically gone, it's that the person is psychologically or emotionally absent, which is the difference. So when you think about, when we lose somebody close to us, when someone dies, what is it that we're actually grieving? We are grieving the relationship. We are grieving the shared memories. We are saying things like, I so miss being able to talk to my mom and have those great heart-to-hearts that we always had. I so miss having my spouse here with me every day to share things that we go through. Those are the things that we are grieving. And when somebody is living with an illness like Alzheimer's disease or another type of dementia, as the disease progresses along the way, those are the kinds of things that start becoming absent. The relationship changes. Maybe I'm not able to have those conversations with my mother any longer, or I'm not able to share those moments with my spouse any longer. And so the person as a care partner was still missing those things, but our family member is physically present. They're present, they're there, they are who they are, but they're different. It's no longer the same. And so people are grieving through this. And oftentimes, because family member is still present, we don't recognize it as grieving. And so oftentimes care partners are feeling all of this rolled up emotions, and they're not sure why or where to place them because they don't recognize it as a grieving process. So when we work with care partners, first of all, just getting people to acknowledge or to recognize the grieving process, and then talking about, well, how do we work through it? So we understand when somebody dies, that's a socially accepted, normalized kind of grief. We understand that. We have processes to help us work through that. But what about this kind of grief? How do we help families work through this kind of grief? It's not socially supported. It's not socially understood. People aren't bringing casseroles over. Well, maybe they are. Sometimes I hear from care partners that they have great friends who are over and supportive all the time, and I'd love to hear more of that. But sometimes I also hear that instead of people coming together to support the family, people end up losing friends who kind of shy away because they're not sure how to deal with this. So it's a difficult kind of grief. It tends to not be socially supportive. It tends to get people frozen and stuck and unable to move forward. So helping people understand and work through this kind of grieving process is really important. And that's part of what our staff team here at the Alzheimer's Society help family members do, is provide that kind of emotional support, help them work through the changes that come when a family member has dementia. And so, if you're watching today and you feel like you need some of that support, to reach out and contact us. We have great staff members, our family support coordinators on staff who provide this service for care partners. So please reach out. And also, often we think about our local hospices, and we think about hospices being a residential hospice, where people are provided that care and support at the end of their life. But many of our local hospices provide support to care partners throughout the journey when someone has a life-limiting illness. So I would suggest if you are feeling this to reach out to your local hospice and find out what kind of supports they have available that might help you with this kind of ambiguous loss and grief. And we do offer some workshops out. Before COVID, we were offering in partnership with our local hospices on this concept, and certainly found many care partners found this very helpful, just to be able to recognize the kind of grief that they are going through and find some ways to help them work through the grief. So I hope that this has given you a bit of information about what this concept is. We have a great resource on this, and I will try to link that in the comments under this video when we're done so that you can check that out, as well as the website at ambiguousloss.com. Again, please reach out to us here at the Alzheimer's Society if you need support. You can message us here on our Facebook page, or you can call our main number, which is 705-722-1066, and start getting connected to services that way. Or if you're already connected to a family support coordinator, know that you can reach out to them for support. That's what they're there for, is to help you through this. And so until next time, again on June the 28th, I'll be talking about some self-care strategies and leave you with a positive note for the summertime. So I hope you're all doing well and you have a wonderful day.